Welcome to Exploring Nevada. I'm Gwen Clancy with the Nevada Department of Cultural Affairs. And in our series, we explore with you the cultural programs and historic places around the state that are really special. Today, we're in a magical place at Lake Tahoe, and here to tell us all about it is Ron James, the Historic Preservation Officer for our state.
We're here at the George Whittell Mansion on the north side of Lake Tahoe. It's one of the most beautiful settings in the entire nation. Tucked within this landscape, which George Whittell owned, is his complex of buildings that he had designed in 1936. And it's really a magnificent assemblage of these stone buildings that fold into the landscape and at the same time work with the landscape so that you see a degree of preservation of the natural environment as well as what's going on today with the buildings themselves. George Whittell worked very closely to design this complex, working with architect Frederick de Longchamps from Reno. De Longchamps was, of course, the fellow who proposed the designs, but Whittell was so fussy with them that it's almost a co-design, partly Whittell and partly de Longchamps. It is one of the most complex projects that de Longchamps undertook. We're, of course, on the Nevada side of the lake, the east side of the lake, which is so well preserved because George Whittell had a great deal of money during the Great Depression and was able to buy 27 miles of Nevada shoreline. He thought he might develop some of it, but for the most part, most of what he had was not developed. So the developed side of the lake is the California side, where all those houses and private inholdings exist. On the Nevada side, we see the consequence of George Whittell's ownership, because most of what he owned went into public management, and it now is a preserved, pristine state of what Lake Tahoe beauty is all about. You know, before we go down to the main house, it's important to point out the grounds and all the different buildings that are here. Whittell wanted a lot of outbuildings for servants and guests. Right up here, we have one of the many outbuildings that were built, and we see this wonderful stonework done by masons largely trained by the Stewart Indian School. So he used Native American masons as well as other masons, but the Native Americans really contributed a lot. You see also this black piece of metal that clings to the chimney here, featuring a chipmunk. Each one has a different forest motif. These were done by Italian ironworkers who were working in the Bay Area and then brought their ironwork up here. This is one of the more peculiar buildings in this complex. This is called the Elephant House. Whittell probably did build it. It was one of the early structures, and he probably did build it for part of his menagerie. He's a very unusual person. Everything he did created folklore, and one of the things he did was to collect all sorts of animals. His favorite friend in the whole world was Bill the lion, but he also had several elephants, giraffes, cheetahs, and many other lions as well, all sorts of animals, zebras. The question was, how much did he bring them up here? Folklore maintains that he had 3 or 4 elephants up here at a time, with them trumpeting at the top of the elephant house. None of that's true. We do have clear evidence that he brought an elephant up here at least once. And the story is that the climate and the altitude didn't suit the elephant very well. But there's a bit of added folklore, and that is that when he flew the elephant up here, which he probably didn't, the seaplane crashed, sank, and the elephant drowned. That's almost certainly not the case, but it's a wonderful story, and so typical of the kind of magnet that Whittell represented for attracting these exotic stories. Ultimately, this was used largely for storage, but he did bring many of his animals up when he visited this facility every summer from 1940 until his death in 1969. When George Whittell died, a man named Jack Dreyfus purchased the estate. Jack Dreyfus is his own peculiar man. You might remember him as the Dreyfus Fund, the founder of the Dreyfus Fund, and his advertisement gimmick was to have a lion walking through the halls of Wall Street, very distinctive. I suppose this estate attracts unusual people, and George Whittell gave his estate over to Jack Dreyfus, and we have a perfect transition. Jack Dreyfus wanted to have this large addition attached to the Thunderbird Lodge of George Whittell, And he worked with preservationists. It isn't the best solution that you can imagine, but it isn't too bad, and it's historic in its own right. It was built over 20 years ago, and Jack Dreyfus is nationally significant, so we shouldn't discount it entirely. In addition, the architecture corresponds to the TRPA, which is the nation's first bi-state compact. It refuses to touch any ground. It rests gently on structures that George Whittell had created so that there's not an enlarged footprint. So it's an interesting piece of architecture and not to be discounted. It's also extremely useful. You can have conferences and weddings go on in there. It's a nice feature that helps keep this complex alive and accessible to the public. I want to take you back up this hill, and we're going to take a look at the lodge from another point of view, because there's a great set of stairs that the public doesn't always get to see, so it's worth taking a look at. So let's go on up here. This is one of the ways to get down to the lodge from the road at the top. It's my favorite. But it's closed off to the public usually because it's narrow and it's steep. All of the grounds here were done by the stonemasons after they completed the house and all the outbuildings. What's fascinating about this is that it's so eccentric and it meanders all over the place. It follows the path of the historic waterfall, but there definitely was an opportunity here for the stoneworkers to use their imagination and to build all sorts of eccentric things, structures that don't seem to have any purpose but are beautiful, a little dollhouse that resembles the lodge itself. It goes on and on. Now the lodge itself is an extremely steeply pitched roof. De Longchamps, the architect from Reno, originally designed a squat mountain cabin, but apparently Whittell didn't like that and wanted to refer back to structures that he had known during his many years living in Europe. Now I get to walk down these great steps. One of the reasons why I like it is because it's so steep. Whittell did not compromise the grounds to suit the design. He forced the design to suit the grounds, and that's why they don't let people use these steps, because they're too treacherous. But that's why I love it, because it's a perfect melding of this beautiful environment and the architecture and design that makes this place such a striking historic site. George Whittell normally only came here during the summer. Even his tunnel was only used during the summer, but it gave him a secret access to the lodge. And we walk over here, and we're in the midst of where the waterfall comes down. In a way, we're fortunate because it's off season and the waterfall isn't working. Now, why don't we go ahead and go into the lodge and down that tunnel we keep on telling you about. One of the things we should point out is right up here, this beautiful example of the Italian ironwork that's decorating the entire lodge. And of course, it's the Thunderbird. Whittell had a peculiar fixation with this motif from Native American folklore. He named his DC-2 the Thunderbird. He put Thunderbirds all over this lodge, so now it's called the Thunderbird Lodge. We're not sure if he actually called it that. And his boat was named the Thunderbird. It was a motif that recurs in his life, and this is one of the best of the iron Thunderbirds that are found throughout this complex. But let's go inside. The lodge is also beautiful and well worth taking a look at.